getting the latest out of Washington, D.C., it's my very own Congressman Ron Estes right here on the Voice of Reason. How are you, my friend?
Great. Thanks, Andy, for having me on.
Oh, it's always so good to chat with you. So much going on right now. Now that we're going into summertime, I know things are going to lighten up a little bit in Washington, D.C., but what a wild ride it's been passing all the tax bills, or the spending bills and the federal budget. We may have been 6 months into the fiscal year, but by golly, we made it happen this year, didn't we?
Finally, it was a little late, very late in the year to get that process done. And,
yeah.
Unfortunately, Speaker Johnson's had his back against the wall from the day he was elected to get that done. And unfortunately, it didn't bend enough spending. I mean, there's enough issues that people know that our deficit's out of control. We've got to do something about it. But we've got to focus on how do we get that spending curve bent back down.
Yeah, exactly. Now that the first step's essentially done for this year, you guys are working on next year, which we can get into later. Are you optimistic that now that we maybe kind of sort of have a structure going that we can start curbing some of that spending and get things under control now?
So I think this is, Speaker Johnson's going to lay out his game plan for this. I mean, this will be the first year that he's had the opportunity to do that, so he's got to work on that. The problem is it's a broad avenue of things we've got to address. It's not just the things that we talk about on discretionary spending, but it's those automatic spending programs too.
Yeah.
And if we spent $0 on discretionary spending, we'd still have a deficit because of the amount of money being spent. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, both Medicare and Social Security we pay into, but we're not paying as much in while we're working as we're drawing out when we retire. And so we've got to fix the math. I mean, that's the problem. And food stamps and all the other programs that happen automatically, we've got to address.
Yeah, that mandatory spending is the big stickler there, and no one wants to touch it. And in fact, and we've talked about this before, that when we even try to talk about it, it goes from, hey, let's just slow the growth of it from a 4% growth to a 2% growth, and then we hear the other side argue that we're doing a 4% cut and how we're just letting people die in the streets. It's a wild conversation that we're not even allowed to have a serious conversation about reform on these things.
Yeah, it really is sad that so many people are looking for political posturing, talking about these problems instead of actually going out and addressing them. And we've got to have some adults in the room that actually focus on let's get these problems addressed so that Americans has always been a great country, and we want to make sure it stays that way. And in order for us to be a leader in the world, we've got to address and make sure that our house is in order.
Yeah, amen to that. Well, first, by the way, congratulations on being the chair for the new tax team with the Ways and Means Committee in Washington, D.C. So now my next question is, when can we abolish the IRS?
We've got some work to do still in that regards. It's kind of just recently we saw the economy starting to slow down to 1.6% growth in the first quarter. That's right after inflation numbers came out that were hotter than expected for the last 3 months.
Sure.
And so we're seeing the full effect of Bidenomics. Even though President Biden claims he's doing a good job in that regards, and the American people know that they're not. And it wasn't that long ago where we had a booming economy. We had people's wages growing instead of declining because of inflation. And it was after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And, instead of paying $1,000 more a month that people are having to do now with inflation, people are actually getting more in their paycheck to take home with them. And so some of those provisions are starting to expire. We've got to address those. I'm the chairman of the Innovation Tax Team, so we're focusing on all the things that America has made great over the years. The research and development to come up with new ideas. And Americans have invented everything from the air conditioner to the zipper. And we really are an innovative people, and we want to encourage that because that leads to economic growth, not just for the folks doing the inventing, but then also the people that make them and make the products and actually get the benefit of using them.
Yeah, amen to that. During the latest press conference from the White House, they had mentioned that the tax cuts from Trump are expiring, and they like to walk that line to where they're going to allow them to expire, but they're not going to allow tax increases on the American people. Not quite sure how that one works, so trying to keep some of this stuff in place, and then, like you said, trying to create innovation, allow people to keep the money in their pockets, allow them to start a small business, expand their small business. That's why we see the vast majority of revenue coming into the country, when we can grow the GDP.
Yeah, and it's another case where President Biden's not being honest in terms of what he says. I mean, he's bragged for years that he wasn't going to increase taxes on people making less than $400,000. But the net effect of is he allows these individual tax rates to increase, which he said he's going to. Yeah. In fact, he's tweeted out of the White House that he's going to. And that's going to be a tax increase on every American, regardless of what you make, and particularly more burdensome on the folks that are making less than $400,000 because they stood to get a bigger percentage cuts out of the tax reductions that came out of the Trump tax cuts.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? At the same time, there's so many other taxes that we could look at with taxes on raw materials or the death tax, for example, or the second-hand taxes if you buy something that's used already. I mean, we've already seen some things recycled through a tax system, 2 or 3 or 4 times, and after a while, I mean, the value of something really gets diminished when we see some of this. Are those opportunities that we could start seeing some reforms on?
There really are some things, although we're in the political posturing now. I mean, the House has passed in a bipartisan fashion to renew some of these Trump tax cuts provisions that have expired. Research and development and interest deductibility and depreciation of new capital, new plant and equipment purchases, as well as the child tax credit. And the Senate, the Democrats in the Senate aren't doing anything about it. They're sitting on it, and they haven't brought it up for a vote on the Senate. If they just do that, they'd actually be some positive signs that we'd see to help with growth in the economy.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? We're talking with Congressman Estes from right here in the 4th Congressional District of Kansas. My congressman, great friend. We've known each other for a very long time. Let's talk about going into election season because things are going to slow down, I think, in D.C. quite a bit. And now, essentially, everything done from this point on is going to be some form of political posturing for most politicians up there on what they want to work on. Immigration, obviously, being one of those major fronts, isn't it? I mean, do you really see that we're going to see an immigration bill come out of substance before election time, or is it going to be a campaign issue, do you think?
So we've gotten into this problem now. I mean, President Biden's broken so many things, but one of the biggest things he's broken is border security in the country. And American people now, last polling we saw was 28% of the American people say that our border security is their top priority, and 68% of the people say that President Biden's doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Because what President Biden did when he came into office is he basically said, I know the law allows me to do some things, but I'm not going to do them. He's not going to do them, and he hasn't.
Right.
And what we've seen is, 7.2 million people that are encountered at the southern border. We've seen 1.8 million gotaways that have gotten into the country.
That's insane.
And this fiscal year alone, there's almost 25,000 Chinese communist men that have come into the country, as well as 19,000 known gang members and criminals that have been encountered and stopped. And it's all because President Biden chose not to implement the laws of the land.
Yep.
So just last Saturday was the 1-year anniversary of the House passing laws that say, okay, President Biden, you can choose to do some certain things, but this law that we want to have happen will force you to do these things. Make sure
HR2.
that HR 2 is a great bill that the House passed a year ago, and the Democrats in the Senate, Senator Schumer's not bothered to bring it up at all. In fact, they've not brought any bill up in the Democrat-controlled Senate.
Yeah.
I mean, they talk about a bill that they tried to cobble together, and they're trying to blame Republicans, but the Democrats never brought it forth in the Senate.
Yeah, you guys have already done your job on this one.
We really have. And not only did we pass HR 2 a year ago, but we've also passed some partial provisions of some things, and the Senate's never bothered to pick those up as well. And it's unfortunate because in the last year since HR 2 was passed, there have been over 17,000 pounds of fentanyl that have come into the country, been over 2 million people that have been encountered by the Border Patrol that have come across the country, and 300,000 known gotaways. I mean, these are people that are seen on cameras or that were chased by the Border Patrol but actually got into the country. And it's all because of President Biden's failed policies. And it's going to be an impact. I mean, Americans are seeing the crime. They're seeing the people dying from fentanyl overdose. I mean, there's almost 300 people a day dying from overdose from fentanyl. I mean, that's roughly the size of a large commercial airplane.
That hurts.
And if a plane crashed every day, President would do something about it. So he should do something about this to help protect Americans.
Yeah, you would think so. It's why we got just about a minute or so left here, Congressman. But you mentioned China. You mentioned the fentanyl. They've essentially openly admitted that this is some type of chemical warfare against the United States, that they're willingly allowing this fentanyl to come into the country. What else can we do to try and stifle China a little bit from coming into the country, from putting this warfare onto us, causing this anarchy, and actually putting up our defenses against this nation?
Yeah, I mean, the president has a lot of tools at his advantage, and he doesn't use them. I mean, President Biden doesn't use them. President Trump used them, was successful at it, whether it's putting tariffs on Chinese products, whether it's actually negotiating and requiring agreements. Right now what we're seeing is China's sending the the supplies and the components of fentanyl into Mexico, and the cartels there are combining it and sending it across the border. So they're really complicit in terms of this poisoning that they're doing to America.
They're totally okay with it.
And we need to hold Mexico accountable to help protect the border, just like President Trump did. We need to make sure that the Remain in Mexico policy works, that we use parole on a limited basis the way it was designed, and that we actually protect America's borders, just like there's issues around the world with countries' borders. We should be protecting America as well.
Yeah, amen to that. 30 seconds left here real quick, but I know it's early in the election season, but are you optimistic? Could we see a Republican majority in the House, the Senate, and a presidency in November?
I really think so, that we should have, President Trump should win the presidency.
He's doing well right now.
Yeah, he certainly is. Because people can compare President Trump's policies to President Biden's policies and see how what worked during the President Trump's administration and what's been big failures during the Biden administration. And the Senate, it's a recognition there that the Republicans should pick that up, because the Democrat Senate's done very little. And on the House side, we've pushed so many good policies through that I believe there'll be a Republican majority in the House and the Senate, and that Republicans will control the White House.
I'm optimistic. We got a lot of work to do, and hopefully we can make that happen coming up in the next session. It's Congressman Ron Estes from the 4th District right here in the state of Kansas. Congressman, always great to talk to you, my friend. Such a great friend. We appreciate it. Keep up the fight. We'll do it again soon.
Well, great. Thank you, Andy.
Right back here on The Voice of Reason. Stay here.